On December 3, 2025, something happened that changed cybersecurity forever. A vulnerability called React 2 Shell received the maximum possible severity rating, 10.0 out of 10.0. Within hours, not days, not weeks, but hours, Chinese state-sponsored hacking groups were actively exploiting it. The success rate? Nearly 100%. But React 2 Shell isn't alone. In 2025, MITRE analyzed over 39,000 security vulnerabilities. In just the first half of the year, 23,667 new vulnerabilities were discovered, a 16% increase from 2024. And here's the terrifying part: nearly 30% of these vulnerabilities were weaponized within 24 hours of disclosure. The digital foundation of modern life, the software running your business, your hospital, your bank, your government, is under assault like never before. And most people have no idea it's happening. Today, we're going to break down the most dangerous vulnerabilities of 2025. Not to scare you, but to prepare you. Because knowledge is the only defense that really matters. Let me start with a number that should alarm everyone. By the end of 2025, we're on track for approximately 50,000 new vulnerabilities. That's 137 new security flaws discovered every single day. More than 5 every hour. MITRE, working with the Department of Homeland Security and CISA, has identified the 25 most dangerous software weaknesses behind these vulnerabilities. These aren't obscure bugs in niche software. These are foundational flaws that attackers routinely leverage to gain control, exfiltrate sensitive data, or disrupt critical applications. For the second consecutive year, cross-site scripting, or XSS, remains the number one most dangerous weakness, with a score of 60.38. That's significantly higher than anything else on the list. To put it simply, if your business has a website or web application, you're potentially vulnerable. SQL injection climbed to second place, and cross-site request forgery moved to third. These are attack methods that have existed for decades. We know how to prevent them. Yet they remain the primary way criminals break into systems. Why? Because many organizations still haven't fixed these fundamental gaps. The median time to exploitation for high-profile edge devices was 0 days. Meaning attackers were already exploiting them before patches were even available. Exploitation of vulnerabilities now accounts for 20% of all data breaches, up 34% year over year. Now let's talk about the vulnerability that sent shockwaves through the technology world. CVE 2025-55182, dubbed React 2 Shell, was disclosed on December 3, 2025, by Meta. This unauthenticated remote code execution flaw achieved the maximum CVSS score of 10.0. To understand why this is so catastrophic, you need to know what React is. React is a software framework used by roughly 40% of all professional developers. If you've used a modern website in the past 5 years, Facebook, Instagram, Netflix, Airbnb, you've used React. The vulnerability exists in the default configuration of affected applications, meaning standard deployments are immediately at risk. The exploitation success rate is reported to be nearly 100% in default configurations. Within hours of public disclosure, Wiz Research constructed a fully working remote code execution proof of concept. Amazon threat intelligence teams observed active exploitation attempts by multiple China state nexus threat groups, including Earth Lamia and Jackpot Panda, within hours of the December 3 disclosure. Google Threat Intelligence Group identified distinct campaigns leveraging this vulnerability to deploy Monocat tunnelers, SNOWLIGHT downloaders, HISONIC backdoors, COMPOOD backdoors, and XMRIG cryptocurrency miners. Let me translate that for you. Within hours of this vulnerability becoming public knowledge, some of the world's most sophisticated hacking groups were using it to break into systems worldwide. They were installing backdoors that let them return whenever they want. They were stealing data. They were mining cryptocurrency on stolen computing power. And here's the kicker, 39% of cloud environments contain instances of Next.js or React inversions vulnerable to CVE 2025-55182. That means nearly 4 out of every 10 businesses using cloud computing were potentially exposed. This wasn't a theoretical threat. This was a full-scale digital invasion happening in real time. React 2 shell was the headline grabber. But let's talk about the patterns, the types of weaknesses that keep appearing over and over. Cross-site scripting vulnerabilities allow attackers to inject malicious scripts into websites you trust. When you visit that website, the script runs on your computer. It can steal your passwords, your credit card numbers, your personal information. In the first half of 2025 alone, cross-site scripting and SQL injection represented the highest share of weaknesses. These accounted for well over half of all WordPress plugin vulnerabilities in early 2025. Missing authorization landed 4th in the 2025 list, jumping 5 positions from last year. This is a fancy way of saying, the software doesn't properly check if you're allowed to do something before letting you do it. Imagine a bank vault where anyone can walk up, and the door doesn't check if you're authorized to be there. Memory safety vulnerabilities continue to pose substantial risks, with out-of-bounds write, use after free, and out-of-bounds read collectively dominating the list. These are technical terms for what happens when software tries to access computer memory it shouldn't. The result? Attackers can hijack the entire system. OS command injection remains a high-impact threat, boasting 20 known exploited vulnerabilities. This allows attackers to trick your software into running commands on your operating system. 6 new entries made it to the top 25 this year, including 3 types of buffer overflow weaknesses and improper access control. These aren't new types of attacks, buffer overflows have been around since the 1980s. But they're making a comeback because developers keep making the same mistakes. Here's what's truly frustrating. Many high-profile breaches start with something like a SQL injection in a web portal or a missing authorization check in an API. These are preventable. We have the knowledge. We have the tools. But we keep failing to implement them fast enough. There's an elephant in the room we need to address: Microsoft. Microsoft accounted for the highest number of actively exploited CVEs with 28, of which 20 targeted Windows specifically. That's more than triple the next most targeted vendor. Why does this matter? Between November 2021 and October 2023, more than 70% of cyber attacks globally targeted the Microsoft Office suite, making it the most exploited platform. 81 distinct vendors were affected by exploited vulnerabilities in 2025, but Microsoft's dominance reflects the ubiquity of Windows across enterprises. When you're on every computer, every vulnerability affects millions of people. Recent examples highlight the scale. CVE 2025-53770 is a critical remote code execution vulnerability in Microsoft SharePoint Server. It allows unauthenticated attackers to run arbitrary code, and despite previous patches, it remains exploitable with low complexity. The challenge isn't just that these vulnerabilities exist. It's the scale. When a single vulnerability affects hundreds of millions of computers worldwide, the impact is staggering. And attackers know this. They naturally prioritize vulnerabilities in widely deployed systems to maximize potential victims. Why hack one small company when you can use the same vulnerability to hack thousands? Government systems are particularly at risk. In 2025, CISA added a 2010-era Internet Explorer bug to its exploited catalog because sophisticated groups were still using it. That's a vulnerability from 15 years ago still causing damage today. Let's talk about timing and money, because this is where the situation becomes truly dire. In the first half of 2025, nearly 30% of known exploited vulnerabilities were weaponized within 24 hours of disclosure. On average, 11.4 known exploited vulnerabilities were disclosed weekly, and 53 per month. Think about what this means. By the time IT receives the vulnerability notification, reads it, tests the patch, and schedules a fix, weeks could pass. But attackers are already inside within hours. Of the 161 actively exploited vulnerabilities in H1 2025, 42% had a public proof of concept exploit, nearly 69% required no authentication, and 30% enabled remote code execution. Let me break that down. Almost half have step-by-step instructions available online. 7 out of 10 don't even require a password. And 3 out of 10 let attackers run any code they want on your system. Now for the financial impact, 46% of businesses reported experiencing at least one data breach in the past 2 years. Almost half. Flip a coin, that's your odds. IBM states that involving law enforcement in ransomware incidents can reduce breach costs by nearly $1 million on average. But many organizations don't report because they're embarrassed or afraid of bad publicity. The ransomware problem specifically has exploded. By 2031, a ransomware attack will hit a business or consumer every 2 seconds, 43,200 attacks per day. Ransomware accounted for 59% of all cyber attacks faced by organizations, with 32% of these attacks resulting from an unpatched vulnerability. 1/3 of ransomware attacks could have been prevented simply by applying available security updates. Research shows that 80–90% of attacks leverage known vulnerabilities rather than 0 days. This means the vast majority of successful attacks are completely preventable. The patches exist. The defenses exist. Organizations just aren't implementing them fast enough. So what's being done about all this? CISA, working with MITRE and the Department of Homeland Security, has released the 2025 CVE Top 25 to identify the most critical weaknesses adversaries exploit. They encourage organizations to review this list and use it to inform their software security strategies as part of Secure by Design and Secure by Demand initiatives. CISA also maintains the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. While CISA added 73 vulnerabilities to their KEV catalog in Q1 2025, only 12 showed no prior public evidence of exploitation. By the time vulnerabilities make it to the official government list, attackers have often already been using them for weeks or months. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency issues binding operational directives that mandate federal agencies patch certain CVEs within 2–3 weeks of listing. But here's the problem: these mandates only apply to federal agencies. Private businesses, where most Americans work, where most sensitive data lives, have no such requirements. The EU's NIS2 directive came into force, expanding cybersecurity requirements to many more sectors. The Cyber Resilience Act will, by 2026, require manufacturers of digital products to fix and notify authorities of any actively exploited vulnerability within 24 hours. 24 hours to fix a vulnerability that might be embedded deep in complex software that took years to build. That's the new reality. For developers and security teams, CISA recommends reviewing the top 25 to identify high-priority weaknesses, adopting Secure by Design practices in development, and incorporating the list into vulnerability management and application security testing. The tools and knowledge exist. The question is whether organizations will use them before disaster strikes. So we've covered the threats. We've covered the scale. We've covered the cost. Now let's talk about solutions. If you run a business, manage IT systems, or oversee technology for any organization, here's your action plan. First, patch immediately. A majority of attacks still leverage known vulnerabilities rather than 0 days. Simply keeping up with patches and basic hardening could prevent an estimated 80–90% of attacks. I know patching is boring and disruptive. But you know what's more disruptive? A ransomware attack that shuts down your entire operation for weeks. Second, prioritize based on exploitation. Not all vulnerabilities are equal. CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog should be your priority list. If a vulnerability is actively being exploited in the wild, it jumps to the front of the line. Third, audit your systems against the top 25 list. Organizations should audit codebases against the MITRE list and integrate CVE checks into CD pipelines. If you have software developers, they need to be checking for these specific weakness patterns. Fourth, train your people. Research consistently shows that well-trained employees are the biggest cost mitigating factor in data breaches. Your team needs ongoing, practical training on current threats, not just an annual reminder email. Fifth, consider your vendors. For procurement and risk managers, use the top 25 as a benchmark when evaluating vendors. Stop buying software from companies that don't take security seriously. Your purchasing decisions matter. Sixth, use virtual patching when necessary. Consider virtual patching via WAF rules or IPS signatures that can block exploit attempts until you patch the actual system. This buys you time without leaving you completely exposed. And finally, plan for compromise, not just prevention. Organizations that can quickly identify and contain an attack suffer dramatically less damage than those that discover the breach weeks later. Have an incident response plan. Test it. Know who to call. Know what to do. 3 weeks ago, React 2 shell became public knowledge. Within hours, nation-state hackers were exploiting it with near 100% success rates. 39% of cloud environments were potentially vulnerable. 2025 brought us over 39,000 new security vulnerabilities. 30% were weaponized within 24 hours. Microsoft alone had 28 actively exploited vulnerabilities. Cross-site scripting remained the #1 weakness for the second straight year. By 2031, we'll face a ransomware attack every 2 seconds. 46% of businesses have already experienced a breach in the past 2 years. And 80–90% of successful attacks use known, patchable vulnerabilities. The threat is real. The scale is unprecedented. And the cost of inaction is measured in billions of dollars and millions of stolen identities. But here's the thing, we're not helpless. The vulnerabilities are documented. The patches exist. The defensive strategies work. What's missing is urgency. What's missing is implementation. What's missing is leadership that treats cybersecurity as the critical infrastructure issue it truly is. 30 years ago, we didn't think twice about leaving our front doors unlocked. That era ended when crime rates rose. Today, we're living through the digital equivalent of that transition. The era of casual cybersecurity, of treating updates as optional, of postponing patches indefinitely, of assuming it won't happen to us, that era is over. The question is, will you adapt before you become a statistic, or after? What's your organization doing to protect against these vulnerabilities? Have you been affected by any of them? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this information valuable, subscribe, because the threat landscape changes every single day, and I'll be here to keep you informed.